Hey, little question here from friend and fan of the channel, Luke. We're going to be talking about how do I structure Unity scenes. So I've been making Unity games for a long time, in a AAA and also indie games, and everybody does it a little differently. In this particular game, Do Animals Dream, this is an indie game. This is a one scene game, so it uses one scene the whole game, which I think is pretty rare and probably never a good idea. Or maybe rarely. For small games, I guess it works, and it basically doesn't load in anything at runtime. So you can see everything's here in the scene hierarchy, which is generally not a great way to do things, but it worked for this project. But the overall structure doesn't change too much. And he was particularly interested in the UI canvases and how they work. So what I'll typically do is, let's go grab the menu, for example. So I've got a menu canvas here, and there is a debate about whether or not you should have multiple canvases or multiple displays. I generally think it's best to just have one canvas per like for example, I don't really like this where it's like you've got this secondary display on its own canvas on top of that thing. I'd rather it just be one canvas, so I don't really agree with how this is set up here. But generally, I'll just have different displays under one shared canvas. And then if I need an in-world canvas, then that's its own canvas. And each one of those canvases, or if I were to do it correctly, those like panels within the canvas would have its own script, which would have a serialized field for each one of the components it references. I would absolutely never add an on-click function to one of the buttons because that's then a scene dependency, which is going to be in the binary, which you don't want. I would always drag it into the main menu or the script or whatever, and then in the script, but in a new game, I would then run assertions on that. Make sure you don't forget it, basically. And from there, I would wire the on-click method. And so basically, I have on blank button pressed as like my formula for naming these methods. So we'll have like a on start game button pressed, and there's probably on something else button pressed here. And then it's within the start game button pressed that I run the start game logic. And when necessary, I'll jump out to other methods, right? I have different services that are constantly running in the scene, and those are all obtained through a service locator. So that looks something like this, where I can grab the service locator and then grab the latest instance of social prompt v2, whatever that is. Oh, that's just another display. So I generally prefer this method versus dependency injection, which takes longer to set up, and it's just more cumbersome. This is like a very lightweight approach. However, it only works for single-threaded systems because you have no real protection against two people all grabbing the same service at once. So there's a danger there. But in Unity, it's irrelevant since everything's on one thread anyway. So yeah, I generally use this service locator pattern, and then I have a bunch of controllers that kind of. I might have a. Wonder where that lives. There's probably the service locator is over here, and that's here in the director. Okay, so the director is kind of like the out of game, meta game objects. These don't represent anything in the game. Their positions are irrelevant, but they are constantly thinking, right? And these are scripts that are just sort of running. And I have a game object for each one in most cases. Looks like I've got a whole bunch squeezed into this one director, but generally I'll pull these components out and have a game object for each one so that you can search for them by name. I guess I broke my rule here, and I've got a bunch just stuck here. But generally, these do things like settings is great. No matter where I am in the scene, I can push Alt L, pop up my settings menu, and then edit it. And this is just a mono behavior that is going to be running in the scene, and then other scripts can jump into it and access it. We'll talk about that again in a second. Steam Manager is just running the Steam achievement system and stuff like that. And here's the service locator we just mentioned. So this is running from the beginning. And this service locator gets hit in awake, and it's pretty much the only game object that uses the awake function. Everything else is in a start function or is sort of on its own initialization path that I've set up independently. Generally, I don't want multiple things waking up at the same time. I'd rather they start, because I need to know that the service locator and some of the other like essential life support systems have been initialized prior to anything else starting. So that's generally how the scene is set up. Let me know if you have any questions. For reference, here's another project which I've been working on. This one's called SWAT 3D. With a, it's gonna be called Breach Buddies. And so this game is very different, right? Because this is a multiple scene game, so the infrastructure is a little bit more robust. Okay, so for this game, I have the persistent game logic, which is over here. So we talked earlier about how like I have the director, which is like my life support system for all these like essential services. And for this one, I've squeezed those all into the persistent game logic. And the reason why I've done that is because I don't want these services reinitializing on a scene transfer. So this persistent game logic, as it might, as the name might entail, is going to be in the scene wherever you start loading from, and it will be in every subsequent scene. It's not going to ever destroy itself. It's not going to destroy on scene load. However, it is also in every scene. So there's one in house, and then if I jump into my other scene menu, there's one in the menu too. Okay, and so basically when you open up a scene, there's going to be that game object there, and it will detect if there's another persistent game logic inside the scene. And if there's another one already, then what it does is it deletes it. So we'll keep the oldest one. So that way I only have one persistent game logic at one time, and then everybody's referencing the same service locator. The other thing that I had to do was, since I'm going to be... Well, the other thing is, like, if I was... So, for example, in this game, you know how I have the settings here? And I'm changing it within the scene for different, like, runtime settings? Well, that becomes an issue, because if I change it in this scene, and then I go to a different scene, I'll have different runtime settings. All of these serialized fields and a mono behavior are going to be overwritten, because it's a different component, really, because it's on a different scene. So for that reason, I have a scriptable object actually set up instead of a mono behavior for my settings. So I still access it by doing Alt-L no matter where I am. And this scriptable object will be referenced by the persistent game logic. Or I don't know where it's referenced. It's referenced somewhere here. And so that I don't know. Somebody references this. And so that is how we obtain the settings. Maybe it's in here in like some code path or something. But that's great, because I could just push Alt-L. I can change up my settings, and then, you know, it's going to apply to every single scene I'm in. And the other thing is that, you know, regardless of which scene I'm working in, like I might be working in the house, for example, which is sort of like the in-game scene. But then if I want to run the game, I want to push play, right? However, I still need the user to go through the full user login flow. And so that's a pain in the ass, right? To switch to another scene to log in. So what I've done is I have like an automated flow, which is here. And so what that looks like is, you know, you set whatever you want over here. And then when you push play, it'll automatically pull you out into the menu if you're not there already. Then log you into a game. It's doing all this automatically right now. And then boom, then you're back into the house. And then you could test whatever you needed to test. So that's kind of how I work on my workflow. There's another thing that just popped up. I have a log which automatically pops up every time you run the game. And in here you can talk about what you're working on. And I found that's really useful because I've used a whole bunch of... I was planning to make another YouTube video on like time tracking, but because I've used Toggle and Rescue Time and all these like third-party software that are supposed to like log your hours of like when you're working on the project, but I find there's nothing better than like a little script right here that'll just prompt you of like, hey, what are you working on? What are you up to? And then every half hour it'll ask you to do a little update or something like that by just pulling up Notepad or whatever your default text editor is and asking you to submit to it. And at some point I'll add a little something that will scrape through this and, you know, maybe determine, you know, what time you're working and how much time you put on each feature of the project. I guess I should probably add some tags to that so that I can better associate what I'm working on. But this is like pre-proto. This is very early stage, so I haven't really built out that infrastructure yet. Yeah, so that's kind of how my scenes are structured. I would love to know how your scenes are structured, maybe a little bit differently, whether you're a hobbyist game developer or maybe you're working on the next AAA big boy game. There's so many ways to work in Unity, and I swear I've seen it all. When I was working at NC Soft, man, we had like nothing in the scene. Pretty much everything was loaded at runtime, and we had dependency injection for days. But honestly, I did not prefer that flow. I think it makes sense to load things in at runtime, but I think when you can get away with something like a service locator, it's way better than the dependency injection frameworks, at least the ones I've used. So to each his own, I suppose. But yeah, I would love to know how things are on the other side. Okay, catch you later.